All right. Whenever someone sees the stream go live, just tell me. Oh, did someone drop out?
It is live.
What happened to Pragmatic?
Don't know.
He just disappeared. Oh, there he is. Are you good, Pragmatic? Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll just we'll just carry on. But hello everybody.
Oh wait,
Oh, there he is.
I didn't realize I was muted. Sorry. Go on.
I guess welcome everybody. I guess we're gonna have a nice little debate here again today. Join with me. I have Liberal Sanity Project. I have Pragmatic Culture, Shane, Sinatra, and Toast. And I believe we're going to be going over immigration today.
Yep.
That's the idea.
So it's going to be me and Shane versus Sinatra and Pragmatic Culture.
Wait a minute, we're on the same side this week?
Yeah, fucking out. I can't believe it too.
Check for signs of the apocalypse.
All right, so I assume Shane and I are going to have the same position, but I'll lay out my position. Basically, immigration, by its very design, grows the size of the economy by growing the supply of labor. Immigrants grow the size of the economy, and they tend to commit less crime than native people. So I can find numerous benefits to having immigration, and I can't find many drawbacks to having immigration. So why don't you guys tell me why you don't want immigrants, basically?
I'm fine with legal immigration. It's the fact that people believe that they're entitled to come here that I don't like. You're not entitled to gather up 7,000 invaders and head to our border and demand entry.
And I'd say, whatever requirements a nation wants to place on restricting immigration are fine too, because, the nation is the property of the people who live in it, essentially. And so they can decide the makeup of their country, regardless of the supposed economic benefits, because really it's just up to whatever the people of the nation want. It's arbitrary. It's pretty arbitrary. So if they don't want it, have to want to grow their economy. If they just want a country to be homogenous, they can sacrifice their economy if they want to.
But you want to, right? That's why you're.
No, not necessarily. I think economy is sort of me personally, I should say, I think economy is somewhat of a overplayed issue. I think in the long run, it's very, like we all like the fact that we have cheap flat screen TVs from Walmart, and the fact that our Big Macs keep getting cheaper every day or something. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's the most important thing, or even like in my top 5 list of things that I think is important for.
So why don't you list the top 5 then?
Top 5? I think cultural homogeneity is a part of it. I think.
When have we ever had cultural homogeneity? I mean, this has always been a melting pot.
This is another argument that I love. It's a nation of immigrants. We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of citizens.
And I think, to the degree we were a melting pot is somewhat relative, because pretty much, for the longest time, immigration was largely coming from countries of Western Europe for most of the time. Then it slowly started, seeping eastward. And so you get people like the Germans and the Poles and the Russians and the Ukrainians and things like that. But I think there was, Western Europe has a fairly similar liberal culture. Like, the French were just as much responsible for starting the Enlightenment as the English. Onto those
but like there was a time, in the 19th century and on into the 20th century when people absolutely would not have included the Irish in, this category of, the good white people that, we want here. So, I mean, you're talking about a very nebulous definition that's not at all objective, that just keeps shifting around.
It varies from person to person. It's basically a matter of your feelings about how people live. That's what culture is. It's people living the way.
Yeah, but I think it's fine for a nation to decide that and to discriminate based on that. I mean, it is arbitrary. I wouldn't even deny that, but it's sort of besides the point because it's the right of a people of a nation to choose it anyway.
Well, I don't disagree that it's the right. I just don't understand why you'd want to. Why is it important?
Well, and I don't really see how you have like the nation as if, every single person here agrees on everything. We're all individuals. We have all sorts of different opinions. And if you say, well, X is our culture, for the longest time, people wanted a Protestant culture and they wanted to keep the Catholics out, and then they wanted a Christian culture and wanted to keep the Jews out, and so on. But
I still agree with that, by the way. I think a big part of it is the people, because you guys are bringing up the past, how it was before. The way it is now is that it is demanded of us that we import thousands of people who will not assimilate, who will not learn the native language, and most likely will not have any positive effect on anything that they come near. These people move to West Coast cities and they shit them up, quite literally in Portland's case.
In like San Fran's case too.
So back then, when the debate was Irish immigrants aren't people, that's back then. It's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about people who are marching towards our border, waving a foreign flag and demanding free government gift.
So,
but you can make the exact same claim, about the Chinese through the 19th, early 20th century, and they didn't assimilate. They created Chinatown, and a lot of what you're saying also just isn't true. When you have second and third generation natives, they speak English, just as well as everyone else, and you don't really have this kind of separation that you have in some places with Chinatown and Little Italy and places like that.
Again, you're talking about the way things used to be.
I'm also talking about the way they are now. The way they are now, you have second and third generation immigrants speaking English. It's not the case that they're coming here and setting up these little bubbles where they refuse to speak English. That's just not happening.
That's only partially true because, I come from a town where we have, or I used to be from a town where we had, I think at one point, the largest population of Portuguese on the East Coast. And so they'd been there for several generations and there were new people coming in, and they still did have enclaves, but more importantly, they still did keep up with the language. And I think, the Portuguese being European integrated quite well, but this idea that, language is all that there is to the culture, I think is a bit simplified of, a simplification of the real situation, which is that just because you speak the language doesn't mean you're really into the culture. And I honestly don't think that full integration is really a thing. And I think that's something that has to be weighed. It doesn't mean you have to deny everyone outright, but it is something that has to be weighed. Like knowing that these people, by nature of just where they come from and how they're being raised and how nobody really totally abandons their traditions, has to be weighed when we're deciding who we want to be a part of our nation.
So is both of your problems really just that people who come here don't have the right kind of attitude?
It's not an attitude. It's not.
You were complaining that they were waving their own flags, and
yes, that is literally an invading army. Where you march to someone else's border and you wave your own flag.
I think that's very hyperbolic.
I always thought that armies had like guns and shot people. I don't.
They do have guns, and they did shoot people. They shot Mexican border officers, and they pulled a gun on Americans. They do have guns. They did shoot people. Criminals
armies
are
a
in this
militia
caravan.
of the state. These are people who are coming to the country. Like they're not being sent by Mexico or Guatemala or
they're literally being sent by South America. They're being people are
South America.
For this. They're being sent here.
I have no doubt of that. South America has
South America isn't an entity. It's not a country. South America can't send anyone.
Okay, now you're just being pedantic. You're being pedantic. You're not addressing what I'm saying. You're not addressing what I'm saying at all.
Couldn't resist, Shane.
You're talking about people being sent. Who's sending them?
I don't know. Who's paying for the fucking trucks?
I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe they're paying for their own trucks.
These people have so much money they can pay for dump trucks to drive them here, but they can't take care of themselves down there.
Yeah.
Well, because have you seen like what a lot of the governments are doing in like Venezuela and Colombia and places like that?
Well, then
Yeah, well, a lot of times people can't even, make a move without some, government thug with a badge, beating them up and throwing them in jail, and they want to get
How
away
did they
from that.
hire? How did they hire trucks then to get here? Like, it seems sort of weird that their property and their fortune is in constant threat by these governments, but somehow they manage to save up enough for like transportation costs. That seems a little bit weird.
These people do not want to be Americans.
So-
They
oh,
don't.
that- okay,
They want.
so
They're marching here, waving a flag, burning the American flag.
So
What
once
part
again-
about that makes? What part about that makes you think they want to be American?
okay, so once again, your issue is that they're coming here, but they're not coming here with the right attitude.
Okay, you know what? Fine. We'll go with that.
Well, even I think it's more than just attitude, although that's certainly a part of it. But it's the unwillingness to accept a dominant culture. Like, a big thing about when people immigrate to Japan is the fact that you're always pretty much a gaijin, no matter how long you stay in Japan. Like, you're never viewed as really fully Japanese. And of course, if you tried to have that attitude as an American for different groups coming to America, you'd be just outright slammed as some sort of racist or something. But when in reality, like, there's a founding stock to America, and they have more of a right to enjoy the fruits of that nation than those people do. And they're outright just claiming they should be, they have equal share and equal stake in this nation upon arriving, upon setting foot in the place. And that's ridiculous.
I'm just lost. Why can't somebody else join the country? Like, yeah, okay, so what's the founding stock of America?
Europeans.
Okay, so Mexicans can't come?
They can come.
Mexicans,
they can't expect, an equal stock in the nation immediately.
Okay,
they can't get here and expect to be have, I guess.
But once
how are they expecting an equal stock in the nation? What do you mean by that?
They're immediately taking up our public goods. Like, that's a lot of things. That's one thing big when people talk about like the cost of immigration. A lot of times they just talk about it in terms of welfare use, but really you had to take into account the public goods which they're using too, which also has a cost. Of course, there's also welfare into that, the stress they're putting on the public school system and health services.
Well, actually, if you look at the links to the economic data I had posted a few days ago in the chat leading up to this, and I'm trying to get the exact. Here we are. Between 2002 and 2009, immigrants contributed $152 billion more in taxes than they received, compared to U.S. borns who took $30.9 billion more than they contributed. So
I'm hearing an operative word here being legal.
Well, that's a part of
not
it too.
Illegal.
And another thing, I've seen that.
It doesn't say these are immigrants across the board. It doesn't distinguish.
Yeah, our argument is not against immigration. It's against illegal immigration.
Okay, so Sinatra, if like every immigrant who wanted to come here immigrated legally, you would have a problem with unlimited immigration?
Yeah, I would still have a problem with unlimited, but that's not the point right now, is it?
Well, no,
we're talking about illegal, uncontrolled immigration.
It demonstrates that your problem isn't just illegal immigration, right? Like, we already assumed on this hypothetical, if they all come here legally, you wouldn't have a problem with it.
That's not what we're talking about.
What's the next problem?
Is it? Is that what we're talking about?
I'm removing variables from this. I'm asking you a hypothetical, assuming, yes, I agree, illegal immigration is a problem. Let's assume that all immigrants who came here legally. Okay, do you have a problem with unlimited immigration then?
If they can assimilate and they learn that this is a place that should be respected, then not really. I don't really care what you do down there.
They respect the
so what assimilate to what? Like what
American culture.
What is American culture? So if they all come here and speak English, you're fine with it?
Dude, quit.
Hold on, it's more than English.
You're trying to set up this gotcha. You know full well what I'm saying. That the people
I have to say, I don't know what this American culture is either, because I once took tango lessons from an Argentine.
Yeah,
how about we go one point at a time instead of interrupting me every time?
Yeah, guys, try to not interrupt each other, okay?
I'm just trying to figure out what this American culture is supposed to be.
Okay, I'd like a response.
American culture is freedom. It's the ability to say what you want to say. You shouldn't come here and say, you can't say this about me.
Don't you think
You can't own this weapon here because I say so. You should not come to a place and then change it to where you came from.
Funny
You
how all
left
the
that-
people I see doing that are
Holy
natives.
fuck. What's the point of
Yeah.
having a talk if you're going to talk over me every 30 seconds?
Well,
Hold on.
can I interrupt real quick?
Well, hold on. I'd like to just a quick counterpoint to Shane what said. That's absolutely not true. The people who are absolutely not doing that, especially if you look at it, unless we could parse it by race here and talk about which natives are doing the most changing it towards like a more less free style of America here. But really, if you want to talk about the native populace, being that the native populace is still majority white at this point, we still have a country that, if it were, is still tending towards a sort of center-right Republican system. And so this idea that it's the natives mainly doing the changing is like a matter of who you mean by natives, and it's a matter of parsing it specifically, because natives is a very broad concept.
So real quick, I don't disagree that the culture of America is that of freedom. I think a necessary component of freedom is that people can say what they want and advocate for what they want, even in a language that they want.
Okay, sure, but then you can't, again, it's about respecting the culture and respecting the founding stock. You can
Freedom means you can disrespect it.
Yeah, well, then we'll choose to limit your access here. Like, we'll choose to say, if a certain group of people continue to come here and say, yeah, we just like want to change everything about your nation that you people set up, then we're going to close our borders to those people or limit immigration heavily because we don't find it favorable, and it's our right to do so. So that's what's going to happen if that keeps going on.
How do you feel about what was going on in Tibet?
What was going on in Tibet?
Where the Chinese were just invading Tibet and taking over it completely.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about the situation.
You don't hear anybody say, okay, you know what Tibet needs? More Chinese. You know what Israel needs? More Palestinians. Do you know what Japan needs? More blacks. So why the fuck do we need more others here?
Well, we already answered that question because it helps the economy.
It
Well,
does.
and I think it's a straw man, because
work.
no one is saying that we need this or we need that. It's that people should be allowed to cross whatever imaginary lines they want to, if they're free people, and if they can find a place that's willing to rent to them and an employer that's willing to hire them, then okay.
Okay, but like I know that simple ass ANCAP case, because this idea that people exist as autonomous individuals within a vacuum is ridiculous. You're not just inviting an individual into your home without any exterior consequences. That individual is using public resources in some fashion, again, using whether it's the education system, health services, plumbing, electricity, all that stuff. And the rest of the nation has to pay for it. So it's not just like, you invite a person into your home and, you're the only person caring for that person. No, like the rest of the country is putting that person up essentially as well. And that's why, again, it's really up to the nation what things are done, because the nation is the collective property of the citizenry.
If illegal immigration helps the economy, why is California not the leading economy of the world?
It's like it's 14th largest economy in the world. Like it is. It's the strongest economy in the United States.
It's behind Brazil and France. It is barely above Mexico. It's not a strong economy.
You really don't think California is a strong economy?
It is a strong economy in some senses, but again, this is like we're talking in super broad generalizations here.
Well, why don't you tell me in what way California is suffering? Let's start.
People are fleeing the state en masse right now because of the absolute ridiculous taxation, and as are small businesses, because the regulation there is ridiculous. Really, the only thing supporting the California economy is the fact that they give massive tax breaks to super tech corporations and Hollywood, essentially.
Hollywood is supporting California.
Yeah, pretty much.
If California is such a dumpster fire, why wouldn't Hollywood?
It's literally a dumpster fire.
Yeah. Okay. So if it is, why wouldn't Hollywood and Silicon Valley move elsewhere?
Well, because they've decided. Well, California makes it particularly good for them. Like, I don't know if you've seen in the news
So
that
it's not a business-friendly model.
it's literally a business friendly model just for Hollywood and just for big tech. Everybody else gets screwed over, but all California has to worry about is big tech and Hollywood because that carries the state.
In economics, that's called comparative advantage. You want to take advantage of what you do.
Yeah, but like comparative advantage is a meme because the economies that do the best in the world are those that are most diversified. Like this, idea that there's supposed to be this free trade and everybody's just supposed to max min the things they're best at producing and then trade for value, like has been completely bunk since we invented electricity. The best economies are those that have diversified within their own borders.
I'm just curious, what would you guys say is the strongest economy in the United States?
I mean, it is California right now. I just know because I've looked it offhand. But of course, Texas is like number two, and it's like within the next 5 years, providing like there isn't another Hurricane Katrina type thing, it's on pace to overtake it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was just looking up. It looks like California is way ahead of every single other state in GDP.
Yeah, they have an economy capable of being.
You cut out.
I think it's his
economy
internet.
in the world, larger than the UK or France.
LSP, you're kind of cutting out, my guy.
Yeah, he has problems with his internet from time to time.
Oh,
yeah, I'm trying to look up GDP of different countries to see how California.
Can you guys hear me, or am I disconnected?
Yeah, you're like disconnecting. You're hopping in and out pretty hard.
Can you guys hear me?
Kind of.
I can.
We just heard you.
Okay. So what I was saying, California, if it were its own country, would be the 5th largest economy in the world, according to the IMF, ahead of the UK and France. So immigration, illegal or otherwise, does not seem to seriously be harming.
Yeah, you cut out again. From what I'm seeing, it looks more like the third, if you don't count the United States, because it's in the United States. It looks like the only ones ahead of California are China, Japan, and Germany.
Well, there's very particular reasons for that, though. Again, one is the fact that it's literally just Hollywood and big tech propping up California. The other thing is the fact that I don't know if you follow this YouTube channel by the name of Brains for Breakfast. He's a British guy who does a little Poland Bowl animations, but he did a very interesting video laying down the fact that, one, California has very little to no natural energy, so they need the U.S. to supply it its energy. Otherwise, they wouldn't have any for themselves. The same thing goes for water. They need the United States to continue supplying water from like places like the Hoover Dam Reserve. I forget the exact name of what it's called. And there's all these other infrastructural needs that California is entirely dependent upon. So it's like, people meme about like states seceding and stuff. Like, but California, if it were to accede, the moment of secession, it would still be the largest, one of the top 5 largest economies in the world. But like within months, potentially, possibly within weeks, that position would fall rapidly because California would need to expend tons and tons of money to try to pick up the expenses for infrastructure that the United States federal government was previously footing. So, this idea that Sorry, go on.
But it looks like the things you're talking about don't have anything to do with immigration, because you've got all of these ridiculous legislation about restricting all the power, and Governor Jerry Brown is like shutting down nuclear plants that still have like 20 years of life in them and stuff like that. That's not immigrants that's doing that. That's just an idiotic environmental policy that's doing that.
No, you're right. It really doesn't have anything to do with immigrants, and that's kind of our point. Because again, like it's
no. Your point is that there are all these immigrants in California, and it's a dumpster fire as a result.
Yeah, okay. Literally,
well, it literally is.
A dumpster fire for different reasons.
To take government aid and use it elsewhere. They can't even prevent their own forest fires.
And it's also the fact that it's a dumpster fire in different areas than the economy. Again, like the scene in San Francisco right now, where you need an app to tell you which streets it's okay to walk down because there's not a lot of people currently defecating there. Like that's a
Okay,
meme society. That's
tie this
clown
to
world.
immigration. Tie this to immigration. Which of these problems are due to immigration specifically?
You don't have the influx of people from various third world nations. You don't have to worry about people not having the common decency to not shit in the middle of the street. Like that's a problem directly tied to immigration, pretty much.
You don't have to take government aid and funnel it into the sanctuary cities and into the welfare programs.
Too, yeah.
It seems like a separate problem from immigration. I mean, yeah, that notwithstanding, the welfare state's not going to go away, but that's a problem with the welfare state itself and not immigration. You guys are ignoring what immigration does for the economy. I mean, it contributes nearly $1 trillion. Oh, I wouldn't. Shane would. But my point is that's a separate issue.
I was just looking up this public defecation thing, and I'm just kind of skimming over sources now, but it looks like the problem with that is not immigrants but homeless, and most homeless are white male natives who suffer from some kind of mental illness, and that's what's doing the public defecation thing.
Some of it is that, but there is a large portion of it which is immigrant population, because you have these people not necessarily in the city centers all the time, but in the suburbs and sort of on the outskirts of the main outreaches of the city. But to get to the immigration economy thing, because that's a point that keeps coming up, and again, I think it's kind of irrelevant, and I think the point about limiting immigration stands without it. But it's a very narrow focus when you say immigrants contribute more, because again, you have to parse illegal versus legal, and then you have to parse the fact about all the public services they use. For example, I found 2 studies. I can post them here. They were in old videos of mine that I'd have to go look up if you give me a second. But 2 separate papers, one from which state? It might have been New York. One state study and one federally funded study, both finding that the influx of immigrants put massive financial strain on the schools themselves. The cost for lunch programs increased exponentially. The spending per student dropped dramatically. Grades declined because schools were overcrowded, and as such, the quality of teaching dropped. And that's just the examples of schools. Again, there's also the fact that there are services being provided to these people, such as welfare, that goes into it even more. And if you actually, there's another way to break this down too, because the U.S. doesn't particularly have stats on, which races pay how much tax. But if you look at the median income of, let's just say, Mexicans, according to Pew data, and then you take that median income and you look at the data for which tax brackets are net tax receivers and net tax providers, you find that 50%, possibly more, of Mexicans are actually net tax receivers just based on the median income that they're earning and based on which brackets they fall into. Just to finish real quick, this idea that they're net tax contributors may be true, because you still have another potential 50% that could be in other tax brackets, and I haven't particularly looked at the bell curve of where that spending falls, but it would be something like some particularly rich immigrants sort of pushing the average ahead, when in reality there's a median that needs to be looked at as well.
All right, let's go back to the defecation thing, because I'm looking over this, and every single link I'm finding on this is talking about San Francisco. And I actually looked for San Jose, which has a much greater immigrant population from Mexico, and I can't really find anything on that. So my question would be, if immigrants are contributing to that, why aren't we seeing that a lot more in San Jose than San Francisco?
I couldn't tell you, but I wouldn't say, again, it's not a problem that's just like, directly
well, then
caused
maybe
by them,
you shouldn't blame immigrants for it if you don't have any real evidence that immigrants are the cause of it.
No, because they are doing it in the city, and it's a matter of overcrowding, which is forcing more homeless onto the streets.
I'm sorry to do this, but do you have a citation that immigrants are doing this?
I'd have to, a few seconds on Google, I could find it, sure. So
take your time.
Yeah, because all the links I'm finding are mentally ill homeless people.
So to try to steer this back to the economy part, if you're looking only at the fiscal contributions of immigrants, which I would say the data on that's contentious, you're only looking at it through a very narrow lens. Every immigrant who comes here represents a laborer, a consumer. It's about the free movement of labor, capital, and it helps us because they have to spend money here. They have to buy clothes and they have to buy food.
Well, that ignores the fact that who are here on work visas actually end up sending that money back to their home countries. Now, if you wanted to pass a law saying they couldn't do that, that'd be another discussion. But again, this is assuming, this type of demand side thinking is assuming that they're, again, net tax contributors, because, again, spending can only boost an economy so much, before you get, say,
they represent nearly $1 trillion in spending, dude.
Okay,
well, and it's also not. It's also
economy.
It's also, I think any economist would say you're ridiculous to say that they send money home, because when they send money home, the people there don't use dollars. If they send it back to Mexico and they use pesos, then they have to go on the exchange market, which means that there are just as many people who have pesos who want to buy things in dollars to exchange for it. So the whole thing about sending money back home just doesn't hold water, economically.
Well, here you go.
What
This article from CNN. Mexicans in the U.S. send cash home in record numbers. Between January and November of 2017, Mexicans sent home out of America $26.1 billion.
And how did they do that when they don't spend dollars in Mexico? They spend pesos.
Convert it well there, though, but I don't see your
yes
point.
They convert it, which means, just like I said, there are people who have pesos who want dollars so they can buy American goods.
It gets converted the other way too.
Well, just because it's converted and people have dollars doesn't mean they're spending back dollars. Again, you can hold cash as an asset. It doesn't necessarily mean it's immediately being returned into the cash flow.
I have to stress this again. It's $1 trillion. It's nearly $1 trillion in spending power. Like, they are spending it. That's a huge number.
Okay, they're spending some of it, but again, are they consuming more than they're spending, which a large amount of government data suggests they are.
Okay, do you have any government data that suggests immigrants cost the United States $1 trillion per year?
I have a table in front of me that on the budgetary impact of whites versus blacks versus Hispanics.
Okay, do you have one versus immigrants versus citizens? That's what we're looking for.
Actually, you know what? I think I might have. Let me see. On my videos, I have a a CIS study saying that welfare usage compared by home and things like that.
So, do you know the problem with using head of household to collect welfare statistics instead of just citizenship?
And it's not just, it's household, not head of household, though.
Right, but it means a household can have a citizen who collects welfare.
Okay, but it's specifically talking about immigrant households versus native households. Like they make
immigrant
that
household can still have a citizen, yes.
Oh, it's saying houses specifically that are just immigrant.
So like for example, if you have an immigrant couple and they come here and then they have a child who's born in the US, that child is a citizen even if they aren't. And if that child is getting benefits as a citizen, then that is that household getting benefits.
Okay, well then that's just inflate. Well, that actually be a case in our point then, because then that's just inflating the number of citizens using welfare, because really that kid happens to be a citizen, but his parents are both illegal, and so it's really the welfare is going in part to them.
But no,
so
you still have to account for. You still have to account for what is being called a citizen household and what is being called an immigrant household. Would that household be called a citizen or an immigrant household? You have to account for that.
Sure you do. And I'm sure, let me pull up the study so you can see. Hold
on. What I have here is just...
All right, well, while you're doing that, I've got another one from the National Bureau for Economic Research. Are immigrants a shot in the arm for local economy? And they found, quote, Each immigrant creates 1.2 jobs for local workers, most of them going to native workers, and 62% of these jobs are in non-traded services. Immigrants appear to raise local non-tradable sector wages and to attract native-born workers from elsewhere in the country. Overall, it appears that local workers benefit from the arrival of more immigrants.
Yeah, see, they create 1.2 jobs, and then they take those same jobs. They can sometimes, like, I get the
They
idea.
take the same. No. Each
You totally
an
logic
immigrant
failed
is
there.
an immigrant is doing one job, and then natives get 1.2 jobs for every one job. So the immigrants aren't taking the jobs; they're creating those jobs for natives.
And this would tie into what I said earlier, which is that it's because they represent a consumer. Like every immigrant who comes here has to spend money here as well. Although I kind of feel like this conversation is pointless. Like, what if your issues with the welfare state, fix the welfare state, right? Like, why cut off immigration instead of cutting off the welfare?
Because if they're using it disproportionately and voting for it to disproportionately expand, that's a problem that's contributing to it. So if you're cutting off an extra use of it, and if you're cutting off people who are continuing to vote for its expansion, you solve the problem at the same time too.
But from what I've seen, it's really a myth that the immigrants are voting for the expansions. It really all depends on where the immigrants go, and I can dig up a study on this too. But
like, do you mean citizens? Like when they become citizens, they vote to expand the welfare state?
I mean, illegally they vote because illegal voting is still a thing. But also but sure, if they become citizens, yeah, they still vote for the expanse of it. Like either way.
So wouldn't you just apply the same standard to citizens though, right? Your issue is the welfare state. It's not.
Well, no, if you prevent these people from becoming citizens, even if they are voting in part illegally, you're still preventing more people from voting for it.
I have a hard time justifying keeping people out of this country because they think differently.
Okay. Well, and also a lot of it depends on where the immigrants are coming from, because if you look at Cuban immigrants or most South American immigrants who are largely Catholic, they tend to lean more conservative.
That's certainly not true, because pretty much all of them are Catholic. And so what happens is you get them, like if you look again, I think Danny Duchamp did a video on this where he looked at the voting patterns of people in the United States based on what country they come from. And, in their home countries, they vote for socialist governments. And here they end up voting for Democrats, which is the nearest proxy to those things. And again,
they vote their country into a shithole, then go, oh, guy, we need to leave here. This is bad. We need to migrate someplace safe, and then vote that country into a shithole.
Do you guys think the United States is a shithole right now?
I think there are certain parts of the United States that are absolutely fucking terrible.
Here's one thing from The Guardian.
Historically turned it into a shithole.
From The Guardian from last year, pointing out over 90% of Hispanic eligible workers are concentrated in just 10 states, and it lists them, and 56% of them are just in the first three. Almost all the congressional districts where Latinos constitute at least 15% of eligible voters are in those 10 states. This means that Hispanics do not have significant political weight across broad swaths of the country. And then it also goes into how low turnout is. And it also goes into the fact that, for example, Cuban Americans are far more conservative and things like that. So, I mean, it's just a blanket statement that just doesn't apply.
First off, it's not saying that they have no political power. It's just saying they have somewhat diluted power. And again, it depends. It's just talking about workers who come into the country. Like the only exception to like the Latinos voting left thing is Cubans, basically only because they come from a country that was directly communist. And so obviously they're going to be a little bit more wary of left-leaning parties, but they're pretty much the only exception to the rule. And again,
well, no, because you've got more Venezuelans coming to this country than Mexicans, and believe me, they'll talk your ear off about how horrible socialism is.
And then they're
largely conservative. And in fact, our net migration.
Does this article
Mexico,
say that? Because I haven't seen Venezuelans be conservative. Okay. I haven't seen that stat before.
Our net migration with Mexico is now negative. There are more Mexicans going back home than there are coming here.
Good.
According to whom? Because I've never seen that stat either.
Your research, dude.
But once again, educate yourself. Yeah. No, like. like numbers have dropped. We've decreased the number of, I think, Mexican migration over the years to some extent, but it's certainly not. I don't think we're a net exporter of Mexicans. I've not seen research that suggests that.
So again, this comes down to your issue is that people think differently, right? Like, so what's your solution to this, right? Is it just cut off immigration?
2 seconds in a Google search. Pew Hispanic confirmed. Took 2 seconds.
2009 to 2014. Well, let's see what.
Yeah, what's the solution, guys?
You cut off immigration. You make it more selective, at least. I liked the old pre-1965 system that had quotas, essentially, and it said, all right, we're going to take from this many countries, and it's only in certain numbers.
So basically, you want an immigration system that only allows people who agree with you.
No, we want an immigration system that's not going to let just
people vote differently. Yeah, that was the issue.
Whoa. One at a time. One at a time, guys. One at a time.
It has nothing to do with people who vote differently. It has to do with people who are going to be productive members of society. Why should we look? At one point in time, we did want the sick, the poor, and the tired. Well, fuck that. We want people who will help the country. If you're just going to come here and say, I'm Honduran, give me the free government Gibbs, please. Fuck off. We're full.
How is that going to work any better than prohibition or the war on drugs? You've got a government that can't even keep heroin out of its own prisons.
Those are two wildly different things. Like
it's still prohibition. It's still and the difference is
not all prohibition is the same. That's a ridiculous claim.
The difference is that drugs and alcohol are inanimate objects and will just sit around waiting for you to find them in a search. Immigrants are people who are going to actively evade you. So it's even going to be,
and we'll crack down, and we'll crack down on them. We'll build a wall, literally the most effective structure at keeping people out in history.
You do realize that most immigrants come here by boat or plane, right?
Oh.
Okay, then we'll increase in searches there. You just say, okay, we'll just increase border security. Like, so literally, what's your point?
I have to say, I am Mexican, and we are an industrious people, and we have discovered ladders. I'm not sure a wall will work, but since we'll entertain this idea, tell me how much you think you want to spend on.
Okay, first off, that's such a stupid assertion that you have ladders. Yeah, because that's what
you have ladders and we have M4s. It's fine.
Yeah, it's like the when the Ottomans were invading Byzantium, they just used ladders. It was just that easy. Like that's such stupid garbage, and it is. Don't even come at me with that.
Right. But, so how much do you want to spend on?
Wait, are you seriously Mexican, LSP?
Yeah, I've never kept that a secret. I don't know where the Jewish thing. No, fuck off.
Let me see. I think there were.
We've tried this wall thing before, and if you look at pictures of the wall, just all over the place, there are little places where they've had to patch holes where Mexicans have cut through. So.
You have a fence.
It's an expensive upkeep, and it's a big border. Like it's practically impossible. I mean, if you want to do it, fine. But I can think of so many different things that the money could go to that would be much more beneficial to the country. I mean, we could provide housing vouchers to veterans to keep them off the streets. Like, there's so much better places that money could go to. Why a wall that won't even work?
What about helping the mentally ill homeless so they won't crap in the streets?
Fair point.
The very idea that Trump became president stopped illegal immigration by I want to say it was 70%. It drove it down. So it's a lot more motivation. If you think that you're going to come here and just be captured and released, you're much more likely to try. But when Trump took office, it went down. And by the way, walls historically, since we want to talk about history, absolutely fucking work. I could think of one actual Great Wall and another wall that is being implemented right now that are doing a pretty damn fine job.
The Great Wall failed, right?
After how long?
I mean, if it's got a time period, let me look it up.
Because again, nations come and go, but again, what kept the Turks at bay from conquering Byzantium for as long as it did? A wall. What did Venice do to ensure its safety as a trade empire? It literally walled off its city.
Who's conquering us?
We are. It's a
third world
dictionary definition of the word invasion. That's what these people are coming to our border by the thousands.
So illegal immigrants are invaders?
Yes.
Are regular immigrants invaders?
No, because they take the time out and they do it properly. They become actual citizens.
Like if Maimonides wanted to move to England to go talk to St. Thomas Aquinas about Aristotle, and he decided to move to England legally, and he left the horde behind, then fine, let Maimonides in. But the fact of the matter is that we're not dealing with that type of thing. We're dealing with like another Tours-esque situation here.
Yeah, I know, but my issue is that you want to apply a selection bias based on race instead of individual merit. That's where I'm having.
Because you can't always judge people by individuals. It's not a practical way of running national policy.
Why isn't it? Look at their background. Look at their educational background. You can do that. That's something we can.
That's something you can do. It's something
okay, fine.
Expensive.
If you want to judge it by individuals, if you want to judge it by individuals, that's fine. How about you have to have more than $1,000 if you want to immigrate here?
Yeah, that's fine.
You have to have some sort of education and a job prospect.
Yeah, you can apply the selection bias too. I'm fine with that. It's your debate partner who was against that.
No, don't get me wrong. I don't think it's practical to cut off immigration by color. I would love nothing more than to shut the southern border down completely, but I just don't think it's practical.
I think there's roundabout ways of doing things that eventually have the same effect, right? Like this is something the left screeches about constantly. Like all these little laws that are in effect colorblind have the effect of eventually discriminating against one race or the other. Like I think there's a lot of requirements that perhaps Sinatra and I would agree on that wouldn't affect largely limit immigration from the third world and South America, and people would scream, bias or racism or something like that. I'm just saying I'm willing to ignore the screeching about racism and cut right to the chase, essentially.
I think when people scream racism, it's because you're trying to limit immigration by race. That's the definition of race.
Oh, well, that's fine.
Well, wouldn't it just be a lot easier to say that only citizens can receive welfare benefits and stuff like that? Wouldn't
citizens only can.
Well, because they do. No, they do have it where if you become legal, then after 5 years you can get it or something like that.
People fake IDs and social security numbers to get benefits en masse. It's not even a hard thing to do necessarily. Like there's a whole black market for this kind of thing. So again, we do have kind of those laws in place already. They're not doing the job all that well.
Fair point. How many illegals do you think receive welfare?
It's a number we really can't necessarily know because we have such scarce data on illegals.
1,000, million. I mean,
millions, I'd say. I don't know if it's every single one of them, but because some are more cautious than others and usually faking welfare.
That's such a loaded question.
No, it's a really simple
because we don't know how many illegal immigrants are here. So how can you ask?
We know it's roughly 12 million. So I'm just curious.
We know it's anywhere from 12 to 22 million.
We found data as recently as like a couple of weeks ago that suggests that number could be off by a double that amount. So again, it's something that we have very loose data on, but I would say it's in the millions at least.
Okay, since we're talking illegal immigrants who are already here, what is your solution for the illegal immigrants?
Port them all.
I do have a solution to this. You can go through one by one, figure out what they're doing, what their impact is, and if they are a positive force, they could stay in California. But if they're a negative force, launch them back over the wall.
How are you defining a negative force? Is it just taxes in versus benefits received, or what?
A criminal element. If they have a job, if they are doing something, if they are being any form of productive member of society, where they can be a plus.
So you would be in favor of the DREAM Act, then, wouldn't you?
No, because these people they're not here.
The DREAM Act literally does what you're describing. You have to be a contributing member of society. You have to have a job, or you have to be enrolled in school. You can't have committed crime. You're describing the DREAM Act.
Okay, so how many of the 22 million illegals are DACA recipients?
At the moment, like 1.2 million. I don't know.
Okay, so 20 million-ish people are not DACA recipients. Okay, get rid of those 20 million, and then I feel like we can have a more realistic idea of
Or
the impact
pass the
of
Dream
immigrants.
Act. Yeah, or we could pass the Dream Act, which seems to be what you're in favor of.
No, there is much more to that. There's
Please
much
tell
more
me
to
the
that.
effective difference between what you're proposing and the Dream Act.
Because the Dream Act is more of a you have a right to be here. You don't. You don't have a right to be here in any part of the world. It is it is a privilege to come here. You don't have a right to be an American.
The Dream Act seems to suggest the opposite. It has standards for you being here. Like it doesn't say you have a right to be here. It says you have to meet a minimum qualification.
Yeah, but again, there's more than just the letter of the law. There's the spirit of the law too. And what the undertone or what the underlying tone of that whole thing is the fact that, if you get here and you manage to evade us for long enough, then we're just going to treat you with kids' gloves and let you in anyway. It's setting up a bad system of incentives.
I'm just curious what the better one.
You should have to be vetted before you come here.
I agree. I agree with all of this in principle, but you got 12 million to 24 million people already here, and I'm not sure deporting them is technically viable. Like it seems like a really expensive and hard way to solve this.
I think the only person I've heard argue this extemporaneously was Sam Harris, who compared it to the Gestapo knocking on people's doors at night. Guess what? You're committing a crime. You are illegally here. You are a criminal element, but we can look over that if you are somehow being a net positive to society. And most of these people are not being net positives to society.
Again, what do you base that on?
By your own definition, it is okay. It is 1.2 million out of the possible 22 million.
Okay, so most of these people have jobs. Most illegal immigrants have jobs.
How do you know? Do you have a study
of
for
large
this?
numbers? People have to make a living. Unless you're suggesting there's 12 million homeless people around.
No, you can. First off, you can fake welfare, so you can make a living simply by sitting around and having.
That seems like such a leap of logic without evidence. You don't have any evidence that there's a widespread welfare abuse by illegals, and even if there were, again, this is a problem with the welfare state. It's removed from this, right? So if you want to talk contributions, let's talk crime. Sinatra brought up crime. Illegals, legal and illegal immigrants are underrepresented in criminal statistics.
I just found the sources. I just posted my. I found the video with my sources. I'll try to copy and paste them. But
do any of them say immigrants current work?
Yes, they do. Let me find report.
So if we're going to talk illegal versus legal immigrant crime, that's going to be harder to nail down than if we went straight by race. So I have the fiscal impact here for,
and here's the report on
race and tax revenue, then the budgetary impact of races. I have all this stuff right in front of me, and we can go through that if you like.
Well, no, I want to go back to crime because you said it'd be harder than just breaking it down by race. It's not. It's been studied. Dude, immigrant conviction rates are lower than native conviction rates. There's a study on immigrant cities, like cities that have a large immigrant population, and those cities tend to have a lower rate of crime than cities with native populations.
Again, immigrant is such a broad term. It has to you have to talk about where they're coming from. You have to talk about again, how long they've been here, things like that. But most importantly, the reason, specifically in the case of illegals, you don't get that representation is because most times they're not simply convicted of a crime. They're just deported. And then that's that. So yeah, sometimes they'll commit a crime and they won't get convicted because instead of being convicted of the crime, they're just deported and there is no trial. And so you're going to get that misrepresentation in there like that.
So you're saying that there are really more criminal immigrants, but the numbers are skewed because we choose not to.
Yes, because we deport them instead.
Okay, so what crimes are they committing that we're not prosecuting them for?
Sometimes it's murder, sometimes it's drugs, sometimes it's petty theft.
Really? Like, we're not prosecuting murders because an illegal commits a murder?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes we just send them
from the country.
Yeah, sometimes we just send them back to Mexico and let Mexico deal with it.
Even if it's not prosecuted, the homicide would still show up in the statistics. And yet I just posted a couple of sources on this. The second one I posted said Cities with the largest increases in immigration between 1990 and 2000 experienced the largest decreases in homicide and robbery during the same time period. Growth in immigration may have been responsible for part of the precipitous crime drop of the 1990s.
Okay.
And
Now, what would
just to reinforce that real quick, the reason is because we already apply a selection bias. So I'm not quite sure why you want to change that to a race-based.
let's look up the overall crime from 1990 to now then, right? So how about we don't look at a study that's 20 years old and that can represent the current state?
Yeah, because that's the thing. Like another thing I'd like to point out is the fact that again, it could the may be possible. That's such a nebulous term that studies get away with using it like that. I don't deny that some immigrants from some places may commit less crimes than some immigrants from other places. That's certainly possible. What I would also say though is that sometimes as you get these lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, in general, crime trends can be going downward, and an influx of immigration might not, of course, affect it as much. But of course, if you look at other places across the globe, like the immigrant crisis in Europe right now, be it in Sweden or Germany or the Netherlands or France or whatever, we can see that clearly there's a correlation between not just crime, but certain types of crime and increased immigration. And it's clear that the immigrants are the ones committing it as well. I remember once upon a time when Crouten T wasn't cringe and blue pilled, he did a video on the Einsenfall map, something along that reported migrant crime.
Yeah, the cooking fires one.
They're not cooking fires.
Yeah, like I remember Sean and Jen's complete garbage, and then Kraut made a response with the official German crime statistics, and he was absolutely vindicated. And so, especially when it came to cases with murder and things like that, you could dramatically see increases in all these things. And of course, the U.S. isn't experiencing a problem nearly as bad as Europe right now. But the fact that it's demonstrable in other places, and you might be able to find a few instances where it's different in other nations that aren't quite dealing with the same problem, like picking and choosing your cases here.
Well, we have to pick and choose. We face a substantially different immigration system than Europe. We don't share a land border with a war-torn nation.
Sure, that depends on what you can. That depends on what you consider war-torn or not, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who would consider Mexico war-torn, even though they're not officially in a war. But even so, again, I think to do what Sinatra was saying before and break the crime statistics down by race, because race isn't an unimportant factor in this, because sometimes the status of someone might not go noted in a report, but the race of that person certainly will. Because you can't know all the time if they don't, either because of lack of documentation or because it was forged and they just happen to get away with it. So there's misreporting. But the one thing we can know for certain is crime stats by race.
Okay, do you think a black person's criminal statistics are the same as a black immigrant's criminal statistics?
Is on the country.
Okay, do you think
also
black American's criminal statistics are the same as a black Nigerian's criminal statistics?
I'd have to think about. I wouldn't know the.
Why do you keep changing it? I don't get it. Why do you keep changing it? We're talking about Hispanics.
He asked for it. Well, firstly, he didn't say Hispanics, but if you want to bring Hispanics into the equation, that's fine. What he specifically said was by race was the way we had to aggregate this. The reason you don't want to do that is because people here face a historically different circumstance than people in other places. An immigrant who comes here has a different circumstance, a different upbringing, a different background than a person who's born here of the same race.
Okay. What's your point? If they're committing more crime, they're committing more crime.
They're not committing more crime is my point.
And actually, then if you look back at the study I posted before the last one that I quoted, it's from 2013, and it says that first-generation immigrants commit crime at a lower rate than native-born non-Hispanic whites.
Which study was that again? Just so I can look at it.
It's called A Game of Catch-Up, The Offending Experience of Second-Generation Immigrants.
So this goes back to the selection bias thing. This is all
that statistic real quick. I did not.
Basically, what it says: first-generation immigrants commit crime at a lower rate than native-born non-Hispanic whites, and it's second-generation immigrants, and later there is pretty much no difference at all.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
they've
Again, but this
assimilated.
is immigrants in such broad terms as to make it meaningless, especially because we're talking about immigration from specific parts of the world.
Then get specific. Let's talk specifically. Which immigrants do you want to keep out specifically?
Hispanic, generally speaking. From the
Hispanics, like the whole of Mexico to South America?
Part of the problem is, even according to UNS, Hispanics are often grouped into whites when talking about criminal statistics.
That's a problem.
Yeah, but this
Different
specifically
category for
says
non-Hispanic
non-Hispanic whites. It specifically said that non-Hispanic whites.
No, I get in that study, but again, the study was so broad as it just used the term immigrants when I'm talking about specifically from, again, I'm not talking about cutting off immigration completely. I'm just talking about reducing it from, countries like Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, places like that.
Even if those who immigrate legally from those countries commit less crime and contribute to the economy?
Well, generally, the problem is that they're not doing that, and so that's why I want to limit it more.
Again, you keep saying this without providing evidence. They are. We've provided tons of evidence that they are. There's several sources in the chat.
Just posted one before, and this is the CIS comparison of native household immigrant use to immigrant household welfare use.
I know, but the problem with this is you're only looking at it from a fiscal perspective, right? The overall economics.
That's exactly what isn't that exactly what you wanted to talk about?
Do you know the difference between a fiscal impact and an economic impact?
I'm aware of there's certain nuances, but I understand. I get what you're saying, but the fact of the matter is this is something that's both. LSP, I think you cut out. Cut out, or did I?
No, I'm here. What's up?
No, I think it's something that overlaps into both, is what I was saying.
Yes, it overlaps into both, but if you look at it if you look at the whole thing, right, they're a net contributor, right? You have to look at it from the whole thing. If you're only looking at it from the fiscal impact, you're purposely narrowing the scope of
$400 million,
which is the fiscal impact, dude. Firstly, even if you were going by that number, they contribute $1 trillion in spending, so it sounds like they're a net benefit by that standard.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do, because now I have the sources because I found the video. So what I have here is crap. Wait, let me just reload something. If you take right here, average illegal immigrant income, if I could find the set, I'll post the link in chat. If you take the income of your illegal immigrants according to Pew, and then you take the data from the Heritage Foundation studies, which the government conducted a similar study, which Heritage cites in theirs. Tax deficits within certain tax brackets, what you end up coming away with is that, again, they might be spending $1 trillion, but they are consuming more in public resources, not just welfare as we formally think about it. But
how much are they spending now? Like, I'm sorry, how much are they? What's the total?
Well,
in the trillions, easily. I think
you have to think about it way past welfare.
No, because he keeps conflating immigrants and Hispanics. There's no way you can run this as a test. Like this, and I agree, you have to do it way past welfare, and that's what I've been trying to do and saying. If you're only looking at the fiscal impacts, you're looking at it in a very narrow way. There's an overall contribution from immigrants in what they spend, in the jobs they work. They lower the cost of labor. It's a benefit for the economy, and most studies bear this out.
Again, not if you're massively increasing the government debt at the same time, though, which isn't the case when you look at these two reports right here.
I'll tell you what I don't get. You keep talking about them, using more resources, and you keep saying, well, it's not just, welfare and stuff like that. It's the other resources too. do immigrants have access to more roads than the rest of them? Do they have access to more schools than the rest of us? Do they have access to more public parks? I mean, what are we talking about here?
They have access to all the same stuff that they do not necessarily contribute into, not to mention what they take out of the criminal justice system in forms of courts, medical bills that end up being paid by Medicaid. You could name a dozen things that they take
But
out.
I just
that they
showed
don't
the crime
necessarily
was
pay
lower.
into.
I showed earlier that what they
It
take from
doesn't-
But
Medicaid is
you're
lower.
talking about immigrants so broadly to make it meaningless.
It doesn't matter if the crime is lower. They're still using the resources for that particular thing, which costs
Again, we're
money.
like
So firstly, I want to point out like a rhetorical tap dance coming on from Pragmatic Culture, who says we're talking about it so broadly. Dude, you wanted to prevent the entire Hispanic race from coming to the United States.
I said
You're
that
the
as a
one
general
talking
term
about it.
because you asked for it. I said that as a general term because you asked for it. I can get more.
Every Hispanic country, like you can't get a little more creative.
Again, I listed some of the countries. I said Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador.
So I mean, why not do it by, again, this just kills me, but why wouldn't you just want if a Mexican billionaire wanted to come here, you would say,
yeah,
I think you cut out again, but
if a Mexican billionaire wanted to come here and bring his money here, his jobs here, his family here, you would say,
most likely he's not bringing his jobs here. He's keeping his jobs in Mexico because labor's
he's
cheaper.
got $1 billion. He's bringing jobs here. Yeah.
bringing some jobs here, maybe, but it depends. Again, it depends.
Got to buy a house, got to buy clothes, right? He's got to eat. I assume he's going to be making money while he's here. He's probably going to open a business with that kind of.
Sure, and he's one person. He's not the entirety of these countries. And by the way you're describing him, he's a pretty massive freaking outlier. So I'm not quite sure how this disproves the general trend of things.
But no, that's something else that we see.
Yeah, that's what you have to consider.
This is something else that we see. Immigrants are far more likely to be entrepreneurs than natives.
Certain immigrants,
far and away.
This is such a broad term; it's meaningless. Certain immigrants from certain nations, like the Korean guy who's going to open up a dry cleaning service, or maybe like some type of Asian buffet, sure, or like the Indian guy who will open up like a restaurant or run a Quickie Mart-esque place, sure.
You're right. There are no Mexican restaurants anywhere in the United States.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying immigrant is too broad of a term to use when we're specifically talking about, one, illegal immigration, and two, if we're just talking about immigration in the United States.
Well, let's narrow it down. Let's narrow it down to Mexico in particular. You don't think there's a lot of Mexican entrepreneurs in the United States?
Sure, there are some, but I imagine, but unless Shane has the data specifically on them, like are they the ones who are really being entrepreneurs? I kind of doubt it. I'm not saying there aren't any. I'm just saying the vast majority of them probably aren't.
What are you basing this on? Because at this point, I'm going to say the burden of proof is definitely switched over to you, because if you're making a claim that they're somehow out of the norm from all the other immigrants, then it's going to be up to you to back that up.
Again, you guys keep the whole point of this was illegals. And you guys keep bringing up immigration. I wanted to talk about illegals. That's what I thought we were supposed to talk about.
Admittedly, we did, I think, kind of get off track. And admittedly, I think, I think I didn't make it even an issue about economics in the first place. I think I just said, it's the right of a people in a nation to decide who they want in there, regardless.
Well, you guys wanted to make it about
benefit.
your culture, right?
There is a culture to America. There absolutely is.
Right. I don't give a shit if there's a culture. Okay. Like it doesn't.
We don't
Culture
want
is
you
just
here.
the way
That's
people live.
simple.
Again,
If you don't like
culture
the
is just the
culture,
way
you
people
don't
live.
care
their
about
lives.
it.
Whoa. One at a time, guys.
If
Can
you
I
don't
go?
like and you don't care about the culture here, there are other places you can enjoy Mexican culture at.
Okay, cool. So culture is just the way people live their lives. It's the food they eat. It's the music they listen to. It's the God they worship.
No.
I cannot like.
It's more
Okay,
than
well, why
that.
don't you tell me, Sinatra? What could?
The American culture is what I would define, and I think a good portion of people here would define as what the Constitution dictates. We have the freedom of expression. We have freedom of religion. We have the right to bear arms, and we have a freedom here that is not enjoyed elsewhere. That is part of the American culture.
The Constitution is a document with no universally agreed upon definition, right? What is freedom of expression to you is different from freedom of expression to me.
No, it's not.
That doesn't narrow down culture.
There is no debate on what freedom of expression is.
That's a constant ongoing debate. What are you talking about, dude?
Okay, hold on. I think
Do I have the right to petition people to deplatform people?
You can, yeah.
That's free speech, right? You can't say I'm anti-free speech. I'm using my free speech.
No, I can say you are anti-free speech by trying to deplatform people, but you still have the right to say that you want to. But I can say you are anti-free speech.
Is cartoon
And
child
being
pornography free speech?
Is
Sinatra,
un-American.
is cartoon child pornography free speech?
Technically, yes, but I will not anywhere argue that point.
Why aren't you assimilating to American culture, dude?
That's like saying, well,
hold on.
Are drugs and cartels Mexican culture? Yes. Well, how come you're not part of the Mexican drug cartel, Liberty Sanity? How come you're not some drug dealing thug on the streets if you're part of the Mexican culture?
Probably because I'm one of those immigrants who was selected through a selection bias and came to the country to contribute something and didn't think it was an entitlement that people had to think the same way as.
Okay, good for you. So you're not one of the bad ones. That's great. But I think
most of them aren't one of the bad ones. We're talking laws of averages. You guys are trying to limit immigration based on who thinks the way.
Averages. Okay, let's play laws of averages. There are 43 million immigrants in the United States. They think that somewhere is 13 to 22 million illegals. So that would mean if it's the highest number possible going both ways, there are more illegals here than legals. So law of averages would dictate that the Mexican population here in the United States is a criminal element.
Well, again, I think some of the conversation about culture escapes us a little bit because there's what's intended and there's what's actually come about. I think when the founding fathers established this nation, they weren't intending free speech to be used for lolicon. I would virulently argue against the idea that they wanted that. I would also argue against the idea that they wanted a group of people from outside of Europe to come in and radically change the way in which we lived, be it for, reasons of taxation.
If lolicon's out, so the argument is it's only free speech if you agree with.
No, I said it's free speech, but I just won't argue in favor of it.
You were just overruled by pragmatic culture.
No. Sinatra's his own person, and he's entitled to that opinion. I just don't happen to agree with him. I'm
asking you, pragmatic, is it free speech? If is lolicon free speech or not?
Look, I guess it's free speech as defined now, but that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that there's intent and spirit behind the design of certain things that go into culture, and then there's the result, and the two things can differ wildly. Like, I think when the founding fathers set up this system, way back when, they were expecting people to use their freedom responsibly and respectively within the frameworks of European social convention. And I think that's very clear when you look at the laws they set up, particularly the immigration laws, which said, people can only come to this people of a certain stock. They were certainly trying to maintain a certain cultural and social framework.
That's not even true, dude.
About the immigration acts that were passed on, within the first three presidencies about who could and couldn't enter this country.
Right. If they were so convinced that the United States must maintain its founding stock, which I assume you mean British Anglo-Saxon, they would have put it in the Constitution. They didn't. They gave Congress the power to regulate immigration, and Congress regulated immigration so as to allow other people.
Actually, they didn't even do that. They only gave them the power for naturalization, not immigration. There's no power to regulate immigration anywhere in the Constitution.
I'm still waiting for my point to be addressed.
No. Hold on. That's garbage. Defense of the border.
If you're talking about the Mexican illegal entrepreneurs, I just posted a whole bunch of links on that.
Oh, I know you posted a lot of different anecdotal bits. Again, the fact of the matter is...
this is statistical data. You want me to read from the last one?
I saw, hold on.
Around 9.5 of undocumented immigrants
were
entrepreneurs in 2014. This accounted for 912,472 people who were not only often hiring Americans, but also generating $17.2 billion in business income each year. Even so, these entrepreneurs defy the stereotypes used by anti-immigrant politicians who state immigrants are replacing Americans in the workforce.
Again, so I would have to look up where they're getting this data from, because again, they're illegal, so it's incredibly hard to gather this data, and I'm very suspect as to what they define as an entrepreneur. But even so, we were talking about culture at the moment. And so this idea that, the United States was just supposed to be this open borders paradise is ridiculous, because if you look at the laws that were passed following that, the Congress clearly did have the power to, either it took it and it was reaffirmed.
Okay, real quick, I just want to
given the
knock
power to regulate
I
immigration.
just want to knock his point out of the air real quick. You're like, these Mexican billionaires gave 10,000 jobs to America. There are over 8,000 Mexicans, unauthorized immigrants working right now. There's over 8 million.
This was close to 10%.
knocks your 9,000
It was like
a little bit out of the
9.6.
water.
It was like 9.6% of them. It was almost 10%.
So that 9,000.
And by the way, I just looked it up. Every single one of the acts you're talking about are naturalization acts. There were no immigration acts until 1882 with the Chinese Exclusion Act. That was the very first time Congress regulated immigration.
I'm just going to start talking about random shit if we're not going to stick on the subject.
No.
Okay, that's so. Can I? I'm going to respond to something pragmatic Culture said again, because he's trying to make this argument that the founding fathers intended for us to have a European stock.
Yes,
they didn't. So hang on. Okay. So what you did was you strawmanned us and said the founding fathers must have argued for open borders. We're not making that claim. Okay.
I was being hyperbolic. Yes.
Okay, well, another word for that is straw manning. But I can quote some founding fathers if you'd like, who say, let's see, the government of the United States has never adopted any measure to encourage or invite immigrants from Europe. I had always hoped this land might become a safe and agreeable asylum for the virtuous and prosecuted part of mankind, to whatever nation they might belong. There's tons of founding fathers who are totally fine with the idea of immigrants coming from elsewhere.
With the little connotation of virtuous and whatnot in there. I think as time progressed, they got their own idea. What?
Can an Asian not be virtuous?
Sure they can, but I think again we can look at broad trends. I mean, again, virtuous is somewhat a nebulous term, and so you can't obviously build immigration policy on who is quote unquote virtuous. But again, let's look at broad crime statistics, internationally and nationally, and we can kind of make assumptions about who is more virtuous than others.
We're looking at crime statistics in the United States, and immigrants are consistently underrepresented. I'll tell you what. Tell me,
they're being deported and not prosecuted. But again,
okay, provide me evidence.
Well, okay, let's look up how many criminal elements.
Say legal immigrants
were deported for crime.
Most of them the last time I checked, but again, this is
we got 30 million immigrants in this country, dude. Most of them weren't.
This is, again, we'll bring up the point that I said earlier that you just completely blew past. If we're going by laws of averages, the average Mexican is here as a criminal element. You still haven't responded to that.
How are they here as a criminal element?
Because more than half of them are here illegally, and that is in and of itself a criminal element.
That's circular reasoning.
Okay.
It's not.
That's begging
It's
the
not.
question.
It's begging
the question.
Straight reasoning. You are here illegally. That is a crime. It makes you a criminal element. If we're talking about laws of averages, a majority of them are a criminal element.
So you're here illegally. Why? Because you're here illegally. Like, that's what you're arguing.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's a crime.
Okay, so
legal immigration is a crime. So if you're here, if you are an illegal, you are by definition also a criminal.
Well, if you guys want to narrow this down further, let's talk about actual immigrants who are here not legally. Are there legal immigrants from any group that commit more crimes than native citizens?
For legal immigrants that commit more crimes, again, going by racial statistics, because it would probably be Somalis, Hispanics, something like that. Because again, if we're talking about legals, the only thing you'd have to go on is race, because we'd have statistics on that. So broke down the broad category of immigrants by race, you could organize it and find such that you have, people from South America and Africa committing more crimes than people from, say, Europe and Asia. Like that would be my hypothetical. If you have evidence to the contrary, I'm more than willing to hear it. But again, talking about immigrants.
So you brought up Somalis. I want evidence that Somalis, as an immigrant group, commit more crime in the United States than native citizens.
Do Somalis belong to the category of blacks in America?
No, we're doing this by immigrants and their nations, right? So you said Somalis. Somali's not a race. Somali's a nation. Do Somalis, as an immigrant group, commit more crime than native citizens?
Off the top of my head, I do not have the statistics on that. I'm just taking an educated guess based on other information I have available to me. Shane, did you just cite PolitiFact? Did you just try to use PolitiFact as a source?
Are you poisoning the well? That sounds like you're poisoning the well.
Yeah, PolitiFact
Yeah, I think that's a
joke.
genetic fallacy there you're doing right there.
PolitiFact is a garbage. PolitiFact is a tabloid. PolitiFact isn't reliable. I don't care if whatever fallacy it is. PolitiFact is a trash source. Get me a.
I'd like to point out that we're the only ones providing sources.
I could post all of them if you want. I posted at least 3 here regarding the Center of the CIS study on welfare use, the Pew Research, the Heritage Foundation study. I have a
All
couple
right, what
more I
about
could post.
Judicial Watch? You like Judicial Watch?
I don't. I've never. I don't. I'm sure
Okay,
I've heard of them,
so
but I'm
already
forgetting.
off the bat, this says illegal immigrants are less likely to commit crimes. Illegal immigrants are committing a crime by existing here. So that is just
Then the illegal immigrant criminal rate is 100%. Then, isn't it?
100% of illegal immigrants are criminals here. That is just a fact.
Okay, so Sinatra, barring their immigration into the United States, is there any other crime statistics?
How about we just take away non-violent offenses of white people? So barring non-violent offense, no, fuck that shit. It is a crime. You don't get to say, well, how about we take away the thing that makes him a criminal? That's retarded. And that's shit reasoning.
Yeah, this is the very thing you're trying to defend. So it's begging the question for you to use that.
How?
Because it's the one you're trying to defend, and you're trying to defend it on the basis of crimes.
Okay, so let's take away everything that makes everyone a criminal. The racial makeups are, it doesn't matter. You're being so dense right now. Do you or do you not?
I'd like to point out something
here illegally is a crime.
Crossing the border at an unauthorized crossing point is a misdemeanor crime. If that's your standard for criminal,
So it is a crime, correct?
Unless you overstay your visa, which 50% of immigrants do.
Okay,
that's a crime too.
Well,
again,
let's play it the way you want to play it. Okay, whatever.
Can I just get something in real quick, Sinatra? Because I'd like to point out the fact that this Judicial Watch thing Shane just studied has like study attached to it. So I find it odd that you'd cite the article instead of the study. And when I go to the study,
well, I'm kind of on a time limit here. You're just demanding things of me. And
I was supposed to leave a half hour ago.
Well, I mean, look, I'm fine for sources to the contrary. Like, you know, we can have these, but like
this should just be a quick and dirty, pragmatic. Sinatra, do you have any sources that say immigrants commit more crime than citizens?
Off the top of offhand, no, I do not.
Then you haven't met your burden of proof. It's that simple.
This is so stupid. Like, you just need all these little minute things. You can make general assessment. Like, induction is a valid process here. You can take general information from other fields, from other things, like information we already have, and we can make assumptions.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And I 100% agree. We provided sources that say immigrants commit less crime. Tell me why you are inductively reasoning that those sources are wrong.
Okay, so first
I'll tell you why I believe immigrants commit less crime. Because they came here legally and they have something at stake if they commit a crime. If a legal immigrant, operative word there being legal, I know this is really hard for you two to understand, but I promise I'm going to try to break this down so even you can understand it. Legal immigrants have a vested monetary interest of being here. They will watch their P's and Q's because they don't want to go back to the shithole that they came from. They want to be here. Illegal immigrants do not share the same thought process because they have no vested interest of being here.
And yet they're still not committing the crimes.
Dude, they are. 100.
I just posted like 3 different sources.
100% of illegals are a criminal element in this country.
For one, yes. And two, the Judicial Watch thing you cited, of the two sources, one is just a theory on why there's a minority threat perspective, and the other study that supposedly proves illegals commit less crime. The link cannot be found, so I can't even view.
Okay, here, pragmatic. I'll provide one right now. It's a modern study from 2015.
So this is from the American Immigration Council.
Yes, an immigrant think tank. Stop poisoning the well, dude.
Yeah, there must be no vested interest in this, right?
Provide a better source then. Provide a better source.
You're still not arguing with what I said. You still have
That 100 because
it's on.
Dude, I can't argue with a tautology, right?
Yeah,
if you're
okay.
tautologically defining every illegal as a criminal because they're here illegally,
that's
this is tautology. I can't debate it.
You said it yourself. If you're categorizing every illegal as a criminal, they are criminals.
Okay,
you need
fine.
to understand that.
What if I say undocumented? How's that?
If you're going to sit here and pretend that there is no criminal element by coming into this country, by breaking the law, then there is nothing left to discuss here. You're being disingenuous.
Let me explain this fallacy by way of analogy. Let's say you were debating marijuana legalization with someone and they said, well, marijuana should be illegal. And you just
are we going to get into the fallacy then?
Hold on. Let me make my point.
Okay.
And they say, well, marijuana should be illegal. You say, why? Because people who use marijuana break the law. Well, what law do they break? The law that marijuana is illegal. Do you not see how this is begging the question?
It doesn't, but that's besides the point.
Difference.
You're just talking about the fact that they're illegal, which is what you're defending. But when you're talking about, actual crimes they will commit against people, theft or murder or whatever, when you're looking at the actual criminal element, you made the claim earlier that they don't have the same motivation that legal immigrants do to not engage in this activity, and yet they're not engaging in those activities. They're not murdering people as much. They're not stealing from people as much. They're not committing those kinds of crimes as much.
Again, the study that LSP brought up, which he just cited from 2015, is again talking in such broad terms as to make it meaningless, because it's talking about
provide a better source. This is ridiculous. Every time we provide a source, you guys do this.
No,
provide a better
providing sources that are pushing away the
point
fact
we're making.
Yeah, you're just it's just completely ignoring it. And to what Barney Fife said a minute ago, the fact is illegals and marijuana are not the same thing. One is a substance.
They're both victimless crimes.
Invasion.
They're both victimless crimes.
Oh, the United States taxpayer is the victim of illegal immigration, or the citizens who illegals happen to murder are directly the victims. There's like a lot of victims here.
But we keep showing that they don't do that as much as natives.
As much.
No,
doesn't matter if it's as much. They are criminal elements. They are existing here criminally, whether they are holding a job and giving into the economy, whether they are living on welfare, whether they are taking up a home, whatever they're doing, they shouldn't be doing it here. They don't fucking belong here.
They don't belong here because we've legally decided that they don't belong here.
Exactly.
Again, you're defending your entire argument by a tautology. You're saying it's illegal to be here. Why? Because we made it illegal. You have to have a better argument.
No, first off, I'd like to say I think you're giving them too much ground here a little bit, Sinatra, because again, the point we're talking about is statistics. The two sources that I saw Shane provide don't link to any studies that pointed this out. And another one is, and I did check the PolitiFact one. There again, it's just to cast dispersion on it in the first place. It is PolitiFact.
It's the least biased, fact checking.
It's such garbage, and it is. You could if you watch the Trump election at all, when you see Trump make a statement and then someone who's not Trump make a statement,
okay,
you see the bias immediately.
Here's a media bias watchdog. Look at what they rate PolitiFact as.
How can I trust this media bias fact checker?
So it doesn't matter what we provide. If it disagrees with you, it's biased.
No, I don't. I'll read it right now because we're so far off topic. But let me see. Left biased.
Hey, if I may interject, we got a super chat, and I think it would be fair to maybe read it real quick.
Sure.
Okay, so Hail Hydra gave $2, and he says that he wants in on the next migrant debate. Yep, that's all.
Okay, cool. So I see, like, fact check, the most comprehensive media bias resource. Who these people are? I've never.
Okay, so what if I just
I've
shit
never
out
heard of
some
them.
random
But hold on,
link that
wait. There's
says
a little
PolitiFact is
there's
bias?
at the bottom, when I'm looking at it, that says, "How do you rate PolitiFact?" Is that? I'm not seeing a methodology thing here.
It's its own poll, dude. It's separate.
What if I
That's not what they're using
post...
to determine the bias. Because I'm not trying to ask you Zagachu. I'm asking you. I'm looking for methodology and trying to see how they're determining it.
If I just find some random link that says PolitiFact's bias, it must just be true.
There's a source code.
Okay, so analysis.
Wait a minute, Sinatra. Didn't you yourself cite PolitiFact last time?
I'm not saying PolitiFact is bias.
Okay.
No, we're arguing with pragmatic culture, who's saying it's left leaning. In review, PolitiFact has been called.
Moreover, I cited the studies that PolitiFact rated it as. So again, I do have to leave, and I've been waiting. I've stuck around for an extra half hour, and I'm still waiting for a response to what I said. Do you or do you not understand the difference between the words legal and illegal and what they mean?
Okay, so yes,
this is just a yes or no question.
Well, it is. Well, no, it's actually quite loaded. Yes, I understand the difference, but the problem we had was that you're arguing for a tautology. You're saying that these immigrants are illegal, and they're illegal because we've made them illegal. That's the problem. There was no foundation to that.
Well, and anyone who's read The Law by Frederick Bastiat knows that there are really two contexts. In the one sense, there is the law as, people would generally consider it to be, crimes like murder and robbery and things like that. And then there's the way you're using it, which is basically politicians wrote something down on a piece of paper, and that's the law. Those are two different things.
It is the way it is, my man. You want to be the difference, be the difference. The fact is, that is the law we have now.
Yes, but should it be the law? That's what we're debating.
Yes, it should. Yes. We should have some form of something to stop migration from foreign hostile entities.
Again, I think this conversation went so off track because, again, my whole point was it wasn't based on economics. It wasn't based on crime statistics. It was solely the fact that you have a people who want to change, who wants the makeup of their nation to look a certain way. And regardless of what reasons you could say for it would be positive to change that makeup, should the people of a nation decide not to, it's completely their right to do so, regardless of whatever reason, which is all my points. And I think, look, we've had an interesting discussion here. I think the idea that, any of this is settled necessarily is up in the air. But at the end of the day, do you deny the right of a people of their nation to decide the makeup of that nation?
I deny the right of a majority to deny rights of other people, including liberty of movement.
Okay, well,
I mean, there was a time when in this country it was actually done by majority that supported slavery, and I would say that did not make slavery right. Slavery was wrong then, just as it's wrong now.
Well, immigration is not slavery.
Free movement isn't this, and free movement isn't. Again, this is like a right either. I know the UN is trying to make it a right, but it's not, because everywhere you go, even in private property land, even in Ancapistan, there are borders, and they're called private property borders. So this idea that free
common
movement
law for thousands of years has always recognized liberty of movement for thousands of years.
That's a joke. It absolutely has not.
You don't have a right to come here. So your liberty of movement stops at a sovereign country. Okay. You can apply. You can try.
Let me put it this way. If I know someone from Mexico and I want to invite him on my property, and you pass an immigration law to stop it, aren't you infringing on my rights now? To have
no, because you are not the law. You are not above the law.
another point though, because I know Shane's an ANCAP. So let's say there's you do invite an immigrant to your house, but you don't own the road to get to your house, and the company that does own the road, and it's the only way to get to your house, says that that immigrant can't use that road because it's their private property and they don't want that person on there. Is that private company now denying you your right to have that person over there, or would you be denying that private company their private property right?
I just mentioned
Passports.
this.
How do they work?
Research property rights theory. Research the concept of right of way.
I was a libertarian. I know all these talking points. I know they rely completely on historical fictions and cherry picking of incredibly specific elements of certain common law cases from like the 1500s within the Holy Roman Empire, which was such an unmitigated political monstrosity that it's ridiculous that you would almost use it and situations like it and try to extrapolate them into the broader sense of the political reality in which we currently live.
Why don't you tell me what legitimacy there is in denying people the use of a long established right of way?
It's not a long established right of way. That's the thing. It's a complete historical misreading to claim that it is.
Do you understand property rights theory and why people have property rights?
Yeah. All right, I'm leaving. I gotta go. Right. I've overstayed by 45 minutes.
Get the fuck
thanks,
out.
Sinatra. This was great.
Yeah, always a pleasure. I think Pragmatic can handle this because both of them together make up half a person, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Suck my dick, dude.
I always love talking to you guys. Love you, LSP. Love you, Shane. Yeah. I'll talk to you guys on the next one.
See you, Sinatra.
Bye, Sinatra. I like Sinatra. He's nice.
Yes.
So basically, property rights come, and I mean the Lockean sense is first use, but basically it means that you have the property rights based on essentially the homesteading principle. You've made use of it and something like that. If you have let's not even get into roads or anything like that. Let's just say it's a walking trail, and the Indians used it for thousands of years, and now people are using it right now. And now you want to farm this land. You can claim that land for farming, but you cannot claim that walking trail because you do not have first use of it. It's a right of way, and it's the closest thing to common property that there is in property rights theory.
Okay, I get what you're saying, but when you have common property again, and this is something Locke, Smith, whoever you consider the forefathers of libertarianism to be, they all acknowledge the fact that the commons or common property was essentially really property of the state because the state managed common property, and so the state does have the right, citing the founding people who you would cite like Locke and Smith, who were all statists, would absolutely agree with me that is, that it has a right to determine who's using its common property. About organizing a state and how you get to that decision is a matter of, political craft and whatnot, but the state undoubtedly still has the right to do that.
The state has no right to intrude on people's property rights, and if you have people using a walking trail as a common means of transportation, how does the state have any moral legitimacy in intruding on that?
Again, it's common property. The state has always owned the common. See, now you're taking things Locke and Smith never said.
Because the way it happened for most of this country, the state did not own the roads. I mean, I'll give you, my personal example. This road that comes right out here outside my house, that dates back to like the 1700s, and for all I know, it was an Indian trail before that. And up until like the 1920s, it was just the people in this area, the families that kept this up, the farming families and everything. And what happened was, I think this was in the 20s, government just declared eminent domain and said, okay, this is a road now, we're doing that. But, okay. How do they have any legitimacy in saying, well, we're just taking over and we're going to close it down or whatever?
Okay, so sorry to interject. We got a $10 super chat from our boy Anthony. And And also, I would like to kind of interject on, I think we should try to maybe wrap it up soon. Maybe try to get some closing arguments towards immigration, because I feel like we got way off track there for a little bit and talked about property rights and such.
Yeah, well, should I just start my closing now? Because you're right. I think we have gotten a little
Do it,
abstract
my
here.
nigga.
I'm just gonna close. The property rights debate, unfortunately, is something separate to this, but something I am definitely interested in coming back and having, because it's something I don't think we got into with you, Shane, which was on like the NCAP debate or whatever, or the NAP debate, whatever it was. It's on DAP's channel. But a nation, regardless of any economic benefit, which is, of course, if anybody wants the sources I used, I can link the video where they're all in the description, or I can just give you the sources you ask for specifically. So they are available upon request. Yeah, but regardless of origin, questionable economic benefit, people of a nation have a right to just decide what they want to do with it and who they want to have here, in the same way that who they're renting their house out to. Like, even if the person renting your house is economically contributing, quote unquote, they don't just get to come in and change everything. And nor does everybody have a right to rent out the room in your house. And so, yeah, it's pretty much just as simple as that, I think, because I didn't hear any denials except from Shane about the right of a government and the right of a nation or the right of the people of a nation as its collective owners to decide their own immigration policy, pretty much. But yeah, let the people and let the dice fall where they will.
Okay, so can I go now?
Yeah, you can go.
Right. So when we argued for the freedom of movement, we did so on the basis of what helps us, what the economic benefits are, and that movement's impact on crime. When you argued for it, you said that it will lead to people shitting in the streets without a source. And I'm sorry, but the only thing I agree that defines American culture is freedom, and that includes the freedom to think differently than I do. American culture carries with it the freedom to be a fascist or a libertarian. It carries the freedom to celebrate one culture or multiple. You have not sufficiently demonstrated why we should impede on that freedom. All that said, I have had this was actually pretty fun. And yeah, Sinatra can go eat a dick, but yeah, other than that, hi, bye.
You wrote that very well. I rate 7 out of 10. Top would debate again.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I'll just go to my point of view. Since we didn't really get into it, we argued kind of on a factual and utilitarian basis and economic basis and things like that. But I come at this as a libertarian just straight from a moral standpoint. If you have someone who's south of the Rio Grande and wants to cross to the north because he thinks he's doing a better job, and you have someone who's south of the Nueces River, which is about like 50, 100 miles north of it, and he wants to travel north of that because he thinks he can get a better job there. The second guy is just going from America to America, but the first guy is crossing this thing called the border, and I don't really see the difference. And really, the only reason why it's the first guy crossing a border and not the second is because the U.S. won the Mexican-American War. If Mexico had won it, the border would have been the Nueces, and the second one would have been the immigrant. So all of this moral basis is around imaginary lines that are cooked up by politicians, usually as a result of war, always as a result of violence, never as people try to conflate property rights in here. Property is peaceful, borders are not. Borders are aggression. No one has the right to stop anyone else crossing an imaginary line just because someone won a war or some politicians got together and drew it out on a map. Everyone has freedom of movement, and if you can find private property owners here who are willing to rent you a place and willing to give you a job, more power to you, and no one should restrict you from being able to do that.
All right. If that's everything that everyone's got to say, then I guess it was a pretty well. It was kind of half productive of a debate, I would have to say. Overall, we got a little bit off topic in some sections, but I think that's okay. I think that maybe if this ever comes up as a topic again, we need to maybe focus in a little bit more the next time, if that's any kind of suggestion to make. But I just want to once again thank Hell Hydra and Anthony for donating to Mr. Dapperton. I'm sure he's very happy to get a little bit of that green stuff. I'm sure anybody would. But yeah, if everyone's done, then I guess we can kind of end it here.
It was great. Thanks.
Alrighty, thanks everyone for watching. Be sure to subscribe to Mr. Dapperton if you're not already, because we probably will be having some more debates in probably next week or the weeks coming.